When time stood still, the account of Pompeii's destruction represents one of history's most haunting intersections between human civilization and nature's raw power. This narrative transcends mere historical documentation. It becomes a meditation on mortality, the fragility of human achievement, and the peculiar way catastrophe can preserve what it destroys. The text we examine is not simply a recounting of volcanic eruption. It is a carefully constructed exploration of how an ordinary day became humanity's most extraordinarily preserved moment of collective death. The illusion of permanence, a city in its prime. The narrative begins by establishing Pompeii, not as a doomed city awaiting destruction, but as a thriving embodiment of Roman civilization at its zenith. This rhetorical choice is crucial. It forces us to see Pompeii as its inhabitants saw it: eternal, unshakable, immune to catastrophe. The description of precisely paved streets, sumptuous villas with internal gardens, shops overflowing with every possible good creates a portrait of urbane sophistication and material abundance. This was not a marginal settlement, but a jewel of empire, where everywhere you could breathe abundance and civilization. The detailed rendering of day life: merchants shouting prices, children running barefoot among fountains, the smell of fresh bread filling narrow streets, serves a deeper purpose than mere scene setting. It establishes the normalcy that makes the coming catastrophe so devastating. These are not anonymous victims, but people living fully realized lives, engaged in the mundane and meaningful activities that constitute human existence. The text emphasizes that Pompeii was breathing just hours before its death, a personification that will resonate powerfully when that breath is finally suffocated. The complacency of civilization, perhaps most striking, is the narrative's exploration of how advanced civilization breeds a dangerous sense of security. Pompeii is described as modern for its time, advanced, structured, with public baths that were a masterpiece of engineering, the hot water systems, the sophisticated urban planning, the cultural refinement. All of these achievements created an implicit belief that human ingenuity had conquered the uncertainties of nature. The text captures this hubris perfectly, and civilization does not collapse. Not because of a tremor, not because of some crack in the wall. This is where the narrative reveals its philosophical depth. It shows how technological advancement and social organization can paradoxically increase vulnerability by fostering complacency. The Pompeians had built something so impressive that they could not imagine it being unmade. Their very success became the foundation of their blindness. The unrecognized threat: Vesuvius, the generous monster. The portrayal of Vesuvius before the eruption is masterful in its irony. The mountain is described as benign, even beneficial, green, full of vineyards, calm. A familiar presence. Its black earth was fertile, producing sweet grapes that yielded wine appreciated even in Rome. The volcano provided shade in summer, making the fields cool, bearable. This was not an ominous presence, but a provider, woven into the economic and environmental fabric of Pompeian life. The critical observation that Vesuvius was not seen as a volcano. It was a mountain reveals how perception shapes vulnerability. Without the geological knowledge we possess today, the Pompeians had no framework for understanding what Vesuvius truly was. They had no concept of dormant volcanoes, no understanding of magma chambers or pyroclastic flows. The mountain had always been there, and this permanence made it seem safe. The narrative captures a universal human tendency. We trust what is familiar, even when that familiarity masks danger. Ignored warnings. The text documents the warning signs that preceded the eruption with devastating clarity: small tremors, cracking walls, sinking wells, animals fleeing. These were not subtle indicators, they were clear signals that something fundamental was changing. Yet life went on. Pompeii was used to those jolts. No one had understood. No one wanted to understand. This willful ignorance speaks to something profound about human psychology. The phrase "no one wanted to understand" is particularly significant. It suggests that the problem was not merely cognitive but volitional. Understanding would have required abandoning homes, livelihoods, and the entire structure of normal life. It would have meant accepting that everything they had built could vanish. This was too threatening to contemplate, so the mind rejected the evidence before it. The narrative notes that some old people told strange stories, memories of distant times when the mountain had trembled. But the people laughed. This intergenerational dynamic, elderly memory dismissed by youthful confidence, adds another layer to the tragedy. The collective memory that might have saved them was present but suppressed, deemed irrelevant in the face of present prosperity. The day the sky went out, the eruptions beginning the transition from normalcy to catastrophe is rendered with cinematic precision. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD begins with perfect ordinariness. In many homes, meals were being prepared, sheets were being washed, and what to wear for dinner was being discussed. This banality is deliberate. It emphasizes that disaster arrives not with fanfare but in the midst of the utterly routine. Children play with clay marbles. Slaves clean columns. Everything is as it should be, quiet, predictable, human. Then comes the rupture. The ground shook. A dull, deep vibration, like a heartbeat of the earth, and then a roar, immense, deafening. Vesuvius exploded. The language shifts dramatically, becoming visceral and violent. It was not merely a noise, but a tearing apart, a cry from the underworld. The natural order itself seemed to revolt. Birds take flight in unison, goats kneel, men cover their ears. The familiar world is suddenly unrecognizable. The column of death, the description of the eruption column rising from Vesuvius, is one of the narrative's most powerful passages. It is portrayed not as a geological phenomenon, but as something almost alive, a monster made of shadow rising from the mountain. The simile of a column of fire, thick as a 1,000-year-old tree, but 1,000 times larger, provides scale while maintaining a sense of organic menace. This was not just destruction but a presence, something that rose without stopping. The transformation of the sky from blue to gray to brown to black mirrors. The transformation of Pompeii, an experience from normalcy to nightmare. The sun, symbol of stability and order, becomes just a pale and trembling circle behind a curtain of dust. Even the fundamental structure of reality, the distinction between day and night, earth and sky, begins to dissolve. The air becomes heavy and oppressive. Breaths grow shorter. The environment itself becomes hostile to life. The rain of stone, the falling Pumice, is described with an attention to progression that captures how catastrophe escalates. First ash, then pebbles, tiny, like sand, then actual stone. This gradual intensification makes the horror more real. We can imagine the growing dread as each stage proves worse than the last. The Pumice bounced off the roofs, the walls, the pavement. They hit heads, hurt eyes, cut skin. The violence is specific and physical, not abstract. The architectural consequences are equally vivid. Roofs creaking under weight, ancient beams giving way, patrician villas and warehouses and baths, all equally vulnerable. The text emphasizes that nothing was safe, everything was covered. This democratization of disaster, wealth and engineering prowess offering no protection undermines the social hierarchies that structured Pompeian life. In death, the patrician and the slave are equal. The city has trapped chaos and desperation. The narrative's portrayal of human response to catastrophe is particularly affecting. We see not heroism or order but confusion and terror. The screams were everywhere. Screams of mothers looking for their children. Screams of men who didn't understand what was happening. Some flee toward the countryside, others seek refuge in cellars, still others run toward the port. But there was no safe place. Pompeii had become a trap. This imagery of the city as trap inverts the protective function of urban civilization. The streets that facilitated commerce and community now become impassable. The buildings that sheltered families now collapse or become suffocating tombs. The very infrastructure that made Pompeii prosperous now channels and concentrates disaster. Those who remain indoors suffocate. Those who flee outside are struck by falling stones or overcome by toxic air. The detail that the port had welcomed merchant ships for centuries but was now unreachable captures how quickly the familiar becomes hostile. Even the sea retreats, almost as if it too were frightened. Nature itself seems to flee from what Vesuvius has unleashed. The slow suffocation, the hours-long duration of the eruption creates a particular kind of horror. This was not instantaneous obliteration, but prolonged terror. Every minute seemed like a century. Families huddled together seeking comfort, but warmth was of no use. Oxygen was needed, and oxygen was starting to run out. This detail is crucial. It reminds us that for many victims, death came not from impact or fire, but from simple inability to breathe. The image of people covering their faces with wet cloths or digging holes in the ground hoping to find air is heartbreaking in its futility. These are rational attempts to survive that cannot succeed because the catastrophe is too total. The lanterns go out, suffocated by the dust, leaving the city in darkness. Sensory deprivation, no light, no breathable air, only the constant fall of ash and stone creates a hell that is both physical and psychological. The final horror. The pyroclastic cloud, nature's ultimate weapon. The narrative treats the pyroclastic flow as the culmination of horror, the thing that makes everything before it only the beginning, the prologue to an even more ferocious tragedy. The description is scientifically accurate, but rendered in language that conveys the impossible. Wave traveling at 300 kilometers an hour with temperatures of 700 degrees. This was a wave made of death, moving faster than flight, hotter than flame. The speed is emphasized repeatedly. In less than 30 seconds, it crossed the distance between the crater and the city. There was no way to escape. There was no safe direction. You could not run. You could not scream. You could not even breathe. This erasure of human agency is complete. Unlike the falling Pumice, which at least allowed for attempted response, the pyroclastic flow permitted nothing. It was instant, total, inescapable. Crystallized death. The effect of the pyroclastic cloud on human bodies is described with clinical precision that somehow increased its emotional impact. The heat was so extreme that the muscles contracted, the bones broke, the flesh evaporated, but the shape, the position remained, as if sealed. This preservation through destruction becomes the narrative's central paradox. Death did not erase life but crystallized it, creating photographs of an infinite moment, tragic statues sculpted by time. The examples given: a mother bent over her son, a man kneeling in prayer, two bodies embracing, a chained dog trying to dig, are chosen to maximize pathos. Each represents a final human gesture: protection, faith, love, desperate survival instinct. These are not generic victims, but individuals whose last moments reveal their characters and relationships. The narrative notes that these gestures were destined to last 2,000 years, a temporal irony that makes the instantaneous eternal. Erasure and forgetting. The world moves on after the apocalyptic intensity of the eruption. The narrative shifts tone dramatically to describe what followed: forgetting. In less than 24 hours, Pompeii no longer existed. It was buried under 6 meters of ash and stone. No one looked for it. No one returned. This abandonment seems almost as terrible as the destruction itself. The city that seemed eternal was not only destroyed but forgotten. Its name faded. The few survivors who fled told confused stories of a day when the sun had died, but few believed, and no one wanted to return. This echo of the earlier unwillingness to believe warning signs suggests a pattern. Humans resist accepting what threatens their understanding of stability. The survivors' stories became mere tales to tell children, legends that no one could verify anymore. The image of life continuing above the buried city is particularly haunting. The fields were green again. The farmers cultivated vines. The roots of the trees sank between statues, frescoes, buried bodies. And no one knew. People walked over tombs, over painted atriums, over tables still set with no awareness of the world beneath their feet. This unconscious treading upon death creates an eerie image of layered time, where past and present exist in the same space without touching. Resurrection and revelation. The accidental discovery, the 18th century rediscovery of Pompeii, is presented almost as inevitability. The city was too perfectly preserved to remain hidden forever. The detail that it was found almost by chance during hydraulic work near the Sarno River emphasizes fortune's role in recovery as in destruction. Workers found frescoed walls, mosaic floors, Roman coins, still intact amphorae without understanding their significance. The initial confusion, they didn't know what they were touching, mirrors the Pompeians' failure to understand Vesuvius. Both represent moments when humans encounter something outside their conceptual framework. But where the Pompeians' ignorance led to death, the excavators' ignorance led to revelation. An entire city was being brought to light. A city that had remained stuck on its last day. An archaeological miracle, the narrative emphasizes the unprecedented nature of what was found. No other place in the world had given back to the present such a perfectly sealed past. The preservation was so complete, it seemed almost intentional, as if time itself wanted to protect every detail. Frescoes retained vivid colors as if just painted. Kitchens were ready to be relit. Beds seemed to have been abandoned for the night. This completeness transformed archaeology. Instead of reconstructing from fragments, scholars could observe Roman life in situ, exactly as it was at a specific moment. The city had become what the narrative calls an archive of interrupted gestures, a three-dimensional snapshot of ancient existence. The phrase captures perfectly what makes Pompeii unique. It preserves not just buildings or artifacts, but life itself, frozen mid-action. The human casts, the discovery of the body casts, represents the narrative's emotional climax. The technique of pouring plaster into cavities left by decomposed bodies revealed not remains, not skeletons, human silhouettes, motionless, petrified in the act of dying. These were not scientific specimens but individuals, a mother protecting her child, a man covering his face with his hands, a young man lying on his side, as if sleeping. The detail that they had fingers bent, lips parted, muscles tense, makes them almost unbearably human. The narrative insists they were not just victims, they were people, and Pompeii had looked after them with terrible and moving care. This personification of the city as caretaker reframes the catastrophe. Pompeii killed its inhabitants, but also preserved them, ensured they would be remembered. The eternal mirror speaking across millennia. The concluding section shift from past to present, asserting that Pompeii still speaks to us. But it speaks not with its voice, but with its ruin, with its human casts, with its broken streets, with its frescoes suspended in an instant. Visitors become not just a visitor but a witness, implying a moral obligation to attend to what Pompeii reveals. The description of walking through Pompeii emphasizes the uncanny preservation. The bread on the table, the comb on the bed, the footprints on the floor. These mundane objects become profound through their context. They are ordinary things rendered extraordinary by catastrophe, physical proof that the people who used them were not so different from us. The question we avoid, the narrative's final philosophical move, is its most powerful. Those who visit Pompeii also visit themselves. The ruined city becomes a mirror forcing confrontation with mortality. What if tomorrow were my last day?